In this talk, we're going to be discussing, I guess, the tension between wild landscapes and tamed gardens, and what's the area in the middle. My name is Anya Murray, and I'm an ecologist and a broadcaster and a writer. I make radio documentaries mainly, and I've written a couple of books. And really looking at our interactions and our relationship with the natural world in Ireland through time, and the context now of biodiversity crisis that we're in, and how we can all respond in our various ways to that. Brendan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Anya, and lovely to see you all. Thank you for coming to our tent this lunchtime. There's a lot of competition out there, but we're the best. So thanks very much. And dare anybody leave? We've got dogs on the door. Should you try to leave, you're gonna get hurt. Actually, I listened to Annie on the way down on RT1 this morning, the radio, speaking about the sea eagles. Wonderful piece as well. So my name is Brendan Dunford, and I'm from County Waterford. I grew up on a beautiful farm in West Waterford, surrounded by rivers and oak forests and fields, every one of which had a name, and farming cows, every cow which had a name as well. But I spent my youth travelling, but I came back to this amazing place, and this is why we've put the slide up. So the Burren landscape has been my home for the last 25 years, and what an office to have. It's just unbelievable. It's just, I even get excited looking at this picture. This is the Burren in maybe late May, June, full of biodiversity, full of archaeology and magic. The white horse is just absolutely magic. So I live in the Burren, on the edge of the Burren, and I've got a nice house and gardens. But if you live in the Burren and you're a gardener, you may as well just forget about it, because you can't compete with this. So that's my excuse. I love my garden. I love working in it. It's therapeutic. And I love this wildness that's surrounded, that surrounds where I live. So I'm here maybe to share some of the stories from the Burren. Really positive stories. There's so much negativity in the world that today maybe we might share some really positive ideas and projects and people. So that's my contribution.
And Brendan set up Burren Bio years ago, and the Burren Farming for Nature scheme, which is a really innovative approach to landscape scale conservation with landowners. So maybe we'll hear a bit more of that in the talk as well.
Yes, and the Harris Corner and other lovely little projects.
Yeah. And we will leave about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for questions and comments as well. So we'll have a bit of a discussion with all of you guys. What I wanted to do is start with a little quote from Richard Mabey. There's this gorgeous book called The Accidental Garden that I've been reading lately. And his very opening sentence, I thought, was relevant to set the context for us here today. He says, the poet R.S. Thomas once described that most commodious of institutions, the garden, as a gesture against the wild, the ungovernable sea of grass, which Richard Mabey goes on to comment, sounds pretty much like a summary of the whole human project on planet Earth. We struggle to find a gesture in our relations with the natural world, which is more like a handshake than a clenched fist. So he's kind of saying that a lot of gardening is the clenched fist. And what we're going to do over the course of the next hour is see how we can be a little bit more like a handshake in how we treat those little parcels of land that we call our gardens. And I guess I wanted to start as well with a little bit of the intention of a garden. Like what is a garden? It's a piece of ground that we have control over, we might have ownership of, and we get to select, to curate, and to control what's in it. What plants are there, what trees are there, what features are there. We like it to be clear, symmetrical lines. We like to have some kind of preconceived idea of how it's going to be, and then we're all about making it fit that particular idea. And we like to eliminate all the wild things like weeds or, weedy trees or things like that. So a garden there's a lot of philosophy behind why we garden and what a garden is. And I would just wonder, do we have to be so controlling about our gardens and what's in a garden? Brendan, have you some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I remember when I came across my first the house where I live now, and it came with a site, and I was much more excited about having control over that piece of land than I was about the house itself. And being a good Irishman, the first thing I did was plant a line of potatoes in the ground, just to plant myself firmly there. But actually, gardening is a very personal thing as well, and it's very bespoke. And some people do like order and control. Other people like just laissez-faire. And like a lot of things in life, I find myself somewhere in the middle. I actually think a little bit of both is where the magic is. For instance, where I live, we've got this beautiful 2-acre field, a meadow, and I give it every year to the farmer for silage, for hay actually. But this little plant called yellow rattle, we'll talk about it later, started to invade a few years ago and started to spread. And with it came a lot of new herbs which are in the ground flora. So it's a lovely wild meadow. But what do? Every week or so I get my lawnmower out, a little push mower, and cut a path all around the edge of the meadow. And the neighbours think I'm mad. This is a silage field, and here's me with my lawnmower as if I'm trying to cut the whole thing for harvest. But no, cutting that little path through, which is the controlling part, actually gives me so much access and well-being in terms of enjoying that site. So you have the wild with the more controlled. And I think nature loves that too. Nature loves a little bit of disturbance. So if you go along there in summertime, all the dragonflies, the damselflies, the butterflies, they're following the same path because it's sheltered. There's lots of access to different. So I think a little bit of both. It's a very personal thing, and this presentation isn't meant to be critical of anybody's gardening style. It's more opening up to new ideas. So I think letting a bit of wildness in and managing other areas in a little bit more controlled way, I think is just a lovely balance.
And the yellow rattle, that's a really special wildflower.
Does everybody know about the yellow rattle? Yeah, it's
you do? Okay.
To my horror, I met a farmer up in Mayo yesterday. I was visiting him. He said he had a field infested with yellow rattle, and he's been trying to get rid of it. And actually, it's very easy to get rid of. You just cut it before it seeds. It's an annual, so it won't stick around. But it's a magical plant. I just have one picture of it here somewhere. I'll come back to it then. So this is what the burn is like, with the flowers and all this amazing biodiversity within it. And when we look at those grasslands, it's not just the herbs and the flowers, it's the insects that use them, which are prolific. But it's also, I'm going to come back to this, but I want to show you the yellow rattle. But subsoil as well is important. So this little plant, it's a parasite on grasses. So if you've got a very nutrient-rich lawn, which is dominated by grasses, and you want a little bit of wildlife in, if you introduce this plant, so collect the seed in June, July, and get it into the ground maybe that October, November, it gradually suppresses the grasses and it creates space for lots of other little plants in the soil there to activate and to set seed. So I've had this plant gradually spreading over the last 10 years. Farmers livid because what was, I think, about 250 bales of hay has reduced now to about 140. So it's getting, and he's mad at me because he said, I'm making him look bad. This field is full of flowers now instead of full of grass. But over the time, the orchids have come back, the common spotted orchid, and some of the helleborines have come back. The clovers are starting to come in naturally. Lots of colours then around beautiful leucanthemum, the oxeye daisies. So many flowers, and always a surprise. Everything, this is the wonderful thing about wild gardening. There's so many surprises if you're observant.
And that's one of the things that I find particularly special is not being so fixed to a particular desired outcome, not being attached to how we want it to be. So when we start to invite a little bit more wildness into our gardens, we have to be open to there being surprises. And I read maybe not that long ago, Monty Don, who is a gardener who I adore and is wonderful for his approach to organic and peat-free and advises people not to use slug pellets and is very good in that way in terms of not doing harm in how we garden. But he also came out with a statement saying that wild gardens are puritanical nonsense. And I think that that's very interesting. I mean, he's saying gardens are about aesthetics. They are a human construct. It's a place where we decide what goes where. We want these symmetrical lines. And okay, we might want a bed of roses, and we might want some vegetable areas, and we might want a little bit of a lawn to throw a frisbee on or something. But I think that that's a very harsh dismissal of wildlife gardening to say that they're puritanical nonsense. And I love the idea of you're talking about the yellow rattle and the surprises that come in. I mean, are wildlife gardening or wild and garden mutually exclusive? And I don't think they are at all. I mean, I always make the distinction as well here between wild habitats. So wild habitat is something we don't really have in Ireland. Things are, curated and cultivated and controlled for thousands of years. So we don't have what we would call a wild habitat. But we have a lot of wild species. So we've got wild birds, and we've got damselflies and dragonflies and hoverflies and butterflies and 100 different species of native wild bee. And they're doing their own thing, dancing to their own tune, living in the ways that they've always lived. They're in no way tamed. So surely there's an in-between where we can have maybe our straight lines and our mowed paths or some quite smart patio features, and some areas where we're being a little bit more welcoming or accommodating to wild species.
I think that's just it. I often think, to me, what makes a good garden is, and I often use the word nourish, but a garden that can nourish us. I love growing my own food, and that's an aspect of gardening which can be done in a very nature-friendly way. But I also think we need to nourish our well-being. So the sense of satisfaction that you get from gardening is huge. I mean, my kids wonder, what's he doing up there for hours and then he's not got better. But it's just so fulfilling. It's just such a great way to de-stress and to just calm down. But then nourishing nature as well. I think we forget about that. Our garden should nourish nature. It's all well and good to point the fingers at others in terms of what they're not doing for nature. But that's really forgetting about what we can do in that small space that we're lucky enough to have some control over. So that notion of nourishment to me, and if a good garden can nourish you, your sense of well-being, nourish you in terms of food, nourish nature as well, then I think you're on a winner.
Yeah. And I mean, context here is really important. We are in officially declared a climate and biodiversity crisis. And here in Ireland as well, we are not a stranger to this. So we have, I mentioned there that we have 100 different native wild bee species, bumblebees as well as solitary bees. And a third of those are threatened with extinction. Of the wild birds that we have, resident wild birds in Ireland, 60% of those, so more than half, are on the red or amber list of birds of conservation concern. More than half of our waterways are not meeting the basic standards of the Water Framework Directive. We have, some of the white butterflies have faced 69% declines since 2008. A lot of these data came out last year. So there is a biodiversity crisis, and I think if we have any kind of piece of land that we have an influence over, whether it's farmland or gardens, or community spaces as well, there is an onus on us to do what we can to accommodate these wild species. And in terms of nourishing, the biodiversity collapse and the environmental degradation that we see so much of, we hear so much of, is quite overwhelming and depressing, and we feel disempowered, and it's hard. So, the tendency is to go and put your head in the sand and not face up to this. Whereas I always find that doing something positive is very nourishing. So it helps to kind of counteract those feelings of climate anxiety or that sadness about the loss of what's happening, and to be doing something really, really positive, like having swift nest boxes around the house and then being able to watch the swifts in the evening, or making those connections between like the types of trees that we might have around the garden, that they're not all manicured Leylandii hedges, for example, that they might be native trees and bushes in the hedges, and that of course supports all the little invertebrates which are the food for the swifts and the swallows and the house martins and all the other birds that are nesting at this time of year. So making those connections between what nourishes us in the wild world and how we can provide for them in our small spaces.
Yeah, I remember chatting to another farmer. I work a lot with farmers, by the way, so excuse me. But sometimes they say very profound things if you listen carefully. And this farmer said to me, he loves nature. So he said, like, none of us set out to destroy nature, but it was a case of death by 1,000 cuts. These little, ripping out these little habitats here. And I think the answer to restoring nature is stitching back in those little habitats back into the landscape. And gardens have a huge role to play in that. I might just mention a project we started off about 10 years ago called the Hare's Corner. So in the west of Ireland, there's a lovely expression about that corner of the field where it's quite difficult to get in with the heavy machinery and with maybe the chemicals or the plough or whatever. So it was kind of left to nature, and farmers would refer to it as the Hare's Corner. It was like a little sanctuary for nature. And I thought that was such a lovely concept because it's about creating space for this beautiful creature, the hare, which we all love.
Kind of a coexistence, isn't it?
Yeah, and the hare is something magical about the hare as well. They say the spirits of the old people inhabited the hare sometimes, so you'd never harm a hare. They're animals that everybody seemed to love. And the idea of people creating a little bit of space, everybody can afford a little bit of space for nature is just so lovely. So when we started that, we thought, well, what can we do? What measures are simple but effective for people to do? Which will create those little hare's corners. And anytime we ask farmers or anybody else, what's the single most impactful thing you can do for nature? What do you think it might be? A pond, a wildlife pond. Incredibly powerful. So one of the farmers we work with in this Farming for Nature project is up to about 27 ponds. Tommy Early up in Roscommon, Kim McCall in
I have visited, and it's like he's an addict. He did one, and he's so delighted with all the wildlife that's coming. And this is a regularly trim farmer who just keeps building more and more ponds and getting more of his neighbours to come and look at the ponds and getting them to make ponds too. It's wonderful.
And he's very sincere when he says to me that these ponds are great, but they are addictive. Just watch out, they are addictive. So most of Tommy's farmers now submerged. It's the sad news. But they're joyful places in terms of attracting all sorts of nature, underwater, on the water, into the water, which is just fantastic. And I have about 3 of them myself at home that we built by hand, and I was just watching yesterday. And another thing farmers say to me is observation is the key to unlocking a joy to nature. So when we dug a pond there a couple of years ago by hand, we dumped the topsoil around the edges. And I was just walking yesterday and looking at all those little holes on the bare ground where mining bees, you mentioned mining bees love south or east-facing bare ground, and this is where they live. I think 80% of our mining bees love that open ground.
That bare soil.
Yeah, that bare soil. So ponds, number one. So in the Hare's Corner, the first measure was ponds. If you want to put in a wildlife pond, we'll give you advice and some little bit of support to do it, and we've had a huge uptake. Yep. The next most important and effective measure can be hedgerow. Even a small hedgerow, just with mixed species, so 9 or 10 native species are lovely, euonymus and the lovely the guelder roses and the hollies and the elders and stuff like that. They're just joyful, they're beautiful. But in the form of a hedgerow, to provide connectivity as well, routes for nature to move, for the bats to hunt, for the birds to nest in, all that kind of thing, because they're quite dense if you pack them in. So hedges, small pockets of woodland can be of huge value. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to plant your entire garden, but a little pocket of woodland could be very densely packed, or it could be a little bit more open. We have a Hare's Corner measure.
And what's this you've got here?
So this is, thanks for reminding me. My prompt. This is a little story from the Burren. This tree, which I've been kind of carrying around the place all day today, but this tree was meant to be extinct in Ireland. So when farmers first came to the Burren around 6,000 years ago, it was a wooded landscape, completely wooded, no bare rock, nothing, no dolmens or anything like that. It looked a little bit like this. Pine was dominant, but you had oak and elm and all these other trees. But gradually over time, we can see from the pollen records that the pine started to reduce and eventually disappeared around 1200 AD. Disappeared right across Ireland, just from harvesting.
As late as that, 1200 AD?
I think that's the figure in my head. And it was reintroduced from Scotland around 1800 for plantation purposes and became known as the Scots pine. So there was a very interesting piece of research done about 10 years ago now by Professor Fraser Mitchell in Trinity College Dublin, who kind of scoped small pockets of very isolated pine woodland right across Ireland and Connemara and the islands and down in the Burren and other parts of the country, and kind of look for evidence as to whether or not these pine sites might have actually survived that period of loss. And only in one spot, right here in the burn, he was able to take samples from the local turlops, some little samples showing that there was pollen and needles being shed by these trees during that period of extinction between 1200 and 1800 AD. So in other words, these trees were growing right through the period of extinction. So in other words, the Irish pine never went extinct. So we've been collecting, under license from National Parks, seed from these trees and growing it on in a nursery in Clare, and then redistributing it through the Hare's Corner across Ireland. So this is one of them. And by the way, it's not called the Irish pine, it's now called the burn pine. And to our amazement, when we actually planted, you can see these are the pots, but there's all this yellow, little white mycelium growing on it. And this is the guy who grows them for us, Bernard. He says this is as unique and as special as the pine itself, because this actually came with the seed from the site, and it's like a growth hormone for the tree. So not only is the obvious tree beautiful and wonderful, but actually these mycelia in the soil with it are part of the special story. So that's part of, when we have our little Hare's Corner woodlands, this is one of about 13 different species that we provide to people in a small pack. And the other measures then we have are, we have a lovely measure, I might finish on this and pass back to you. It's called so this is some of the family. This is one of the ponds. This is a common knowledge down in Clare. It's like Heathrow Airport with dragonflies and damselflies and birds and everything. It's just zigzag. It is phenomenal. It's just so beautiful. And that's what I mean about above and below ground sort of stuff. But one of the measures that we provide with the Hare's Corner is we send an ecologist out to your piece of land, be it a garden or a small farm, and we give them the top 10 tips that they can do for improving biodiversity on their land. And typically it's grassland, because our grasslands are such a rare and scarce resource now that restoring them is of critical importance. And even your little bit of grassland can have huge value. In terms of plants per square metre, all right, you get maybe 50 in the barn, but in your own garden you can have 10, 12, 14, 20 plants per square metre if you manage it correctly. So there's lots of different options. And what we're finding with the Hare's Corner is that there's a huge interest in people to do something for nature. People really want to do something, but people are terrified of doing the wrong thing. And I think maybe as scientists and as advisors, sometimes we overcomplicate things. We make people afraid to do anything, and that's the worst possible outcome. So by providing a little piece of advice and a little bit of support, be it trees or advice and funding, you can have a huge difference. So that's the Hare's Corner, and that's the burn pine. And this is for Ballinturbert Gardens.
It's for Ballinturbert, you're going to give it here. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. I think this is a gorgeous example, though, of how, okay, people can be intimidated by being afraid of doing the wrong thing, but the nuances are important. And there's a kind of a basic misconception often that like trees are good full stop, and might pick, species that really don't have much benefit for wildlife. And the more you dig down into the detail of what trees to plant where, what soil type, looking to the locality, seeing what trees are there, and plant. You mentioned, Euronymous, the spindle tree, which is a fantastic, beautiful little small tree, native tree that's not very well known, but if that's something that's going to grow well, they're gorgeous. Or Gelder rose, whereas we always tend to go for these kind of horticultural varieties that are have very little offering for wildlife. Whereas this kind of, I got sent some Irish whitebeam as well for Cavan. Oh, it's a fantastic tree, and the people in Home Tree have collected up seeds and are cultivating that. So there's more connection when you do something that kind of detail as well, as opposed to maybe just a standard crab apple from the local middle aisle supermarket. They give more meaning. And I know that in Common Knowledge here, I'm a volunteer as chair of the board of Common Knowledge, and we do a lot of outreach work trying to invite people in to show them this is a pond, this is what you can do for the tree planting, being very specific about what trees where and what the provenance of the trees that you're planting are. And I love your story about the mycorrhizal as well there. I think probably a lot of people here are already into nature and wildlife planting and being particular about the source of the trees and the species and what's being planted where. I get that impression. Yeah.
Just on tree, and I thought you were going to talk about bees there for a moment because you're heading in that direction.
Yes, so common misconceptions was another thing we were going to talk about. I do some teaching for small businesses, and everybody who comes in for the 12-week program at the beginning has a notion that they're going to have branded wildflower seed bombs and honeybee hives. And I spend the next 12 weeks undoing those notions. No, honeybees are not a conservation measure. It's like being worried about the extinction of wild bird species and getting a few hens in your garden. You do some of this as well with your work.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions. I mean, I still think trying stuff out and learning is really important, but I think one of the ones, like in terms of advice I'd often give people, with going back to the beginning before I come to your point, is that like don't be afraid to be messy. A little bit of mess in the garden is great. That's where the surprises come from. When you leave something on the ground and a few weeks later you pick it up and there's a lizard underneath it. That's happened to me during the week. Be a little bit messy and untidy, and with your plantings as well. Think long term, but also think year round. So biodiversity needs things very early in the year, and that's why ivy is so good. A lot of people think it's a real problem, but it's actually really good. And later on in the year, of course, your dandelions have made such a great resurrection now, and it's just such a joy to see the dandelions growing lately. And even in my front yard, watching even little finches eat the seed heads from the dandelions, fantastic. But later on through the year as well, brambles and other vilified. Okay, they can be a problem, but if you clip away at them gradually, but some of them are just fantastic. Nettles. So some of the problem species as we see it are really important for nature. Just having that diversity is really good, and having a little bit of a mess around the place is really good. But the one kind of misconception I kind of just want to talk for a second about is about a little bit about farming. And this is a personal thing of mine, that there's a conception there that for nature farming is always bad. And I thought that myself coming to the Burren years ago, and when I saw these amazing grasslands, that this is amazing. But
isn't that unbelievable that is a semi-natural habitat?
Yeah, semi-natural habitat, nothing added, just nature. But the interesting thing about it is that if you didn't have the animals in here at a certain time, these animals, you just wouldn't have that biodiversity. So it's not that farming is bad; it's that the wrong type of farming is terrible, but the right type of farming is critical to our biodiversity. So in the Burren, having those animals out in wintertime, harvesting off all the dead grass, reducing the nutrient load, creating a little bit of competition within the grassland flora is what allows the gentians and the orchids and all these little species enough light and space to thrive during summertime. So it's the perfect symbiosis, the Burren, our best landscape for biodiversity because of the farming practice. So when you think about your little patch of grassland, don't think, I think rewilding can be a little bit of a dangerous thing sometimes, because I think, to me, the best practice is a little bit of management. So if you cut it maybe a little bit early, but once the dandelions start appearing, just let it off. Maybe cut a few paths through. But at the end of the summer, you need to remove a lot of the dead material. That little bit of interference is what allows nature to thrive. It's that interface between human activity and natural world, I think, is where the real magic occurs. So that's one misconception. You do need maybe a little bit of management to ensure.
Sometimes I love the idea that, if you've got a few acres, leave one bit that's completely, okay, unless you've got some major invasive species or something in there, but to actually leave it be and see what happens over time.
But I do agree. Again, it's the diversity. But if you wanted nice species-rich grassland, you're going to have to give it a little help along the way as well, because it's in the natural habitat in some ways. Yeah,
and I'm sure people here know there's fantastic guidance on pollinators.ie for having a long meadow, having the different kinds of management on different types of grasslands to encourage pollinators. But I want to come back to, you mentioned ivy.
Yes.
And nettles. And I wonder how it is that we came to consider collectively that ivy is a bad thing and has to be ripped down off the walls, or trees, that it kills trees, it's a parasite, or that nettles need to be, trimmed and removed, they're bad. Now, I remember falling into a bed of nettles as a child in a swimsuit, but I still love nettles. You harvest them. I made nettle soup during the week. There's several butterfly species lay their eggs specifically on nettles. It's the larval food plant for some of our native butterflies. There's an incredible amount of butterflies and bugs and beetles depend on nettles. So why is it that we have something that's free and abundant and generous, like ivy you mentioned, is such a gorgeous, the ivy flowers that come out in September are really rich in nectar. So a lot of the late bees who are still out, and there's not a lot of flowering species then, they get a really important resource of pollen and nectar in the autumn from the ivy. And then, of course, the berries in the winter are great bird food. Ivy is a really crucial habitat for roosting bats as well. All the different native wild bats who are very much declining, they love hanging out in ivy and roosting in ivy. So how did it come to be that we consider all of the best of things, the most abundant, free, wild things to be bad, and we spray them with weed killers, and we hack away at them and we chop them down? To me, there's so much about attitudes, and it is this kind of, I guess, decolonizing our perspectives, lessening our attachment to control, and allowing wild things, shifting our attitudes a bit to allow wild things to be something gorgeous. I mean, look at this. These are all kind of wild cow parsley that are just harvested from here, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, it's as a kind of a gardener myself, you know, you love little patch nettles. I think the problem is when they start to get out of control,
Yeah.
and that can likewise thistles. But moderation is a thing, and this is where I think some people think, what are they talking about? They've never had to deal with these issues before in their garden. We all have had.
Yeah.
It is hard to keep the balance sometimes, but that's nature. It's a little bit of give and a little bit of take. But what we're saying is that there is good, even when you think it's all bad, there's actually some good things. The one place where we draw the line, of course, are invasive species. We just can't keep bringing them into the garden. We can see the destruction that they've caused. So having the odd and non-native is okay in my book, but it's watching out for these invasive species which have done so much damage. We have a Valeriana in the Burren now, which is a beautiful plant, Centranthus ruber. I think it's called the Latin name, but it's taken off radically. There's huge fields of red. It's like being in Amsterdam or something in the Burren. It looks completely unnatural. It started off in bridges, just took off out into the landscape. Mycelius moralis, the wall lettuce, it's quite common as well. So we have to be careful, particularly when we're buying in species. And by the way, with ponds, never go to the garden centre and buy in a plant for your pond, because there's always something stuck in the roots. There's always a problem with it. If you really have to get something, try and get it locally if you can at all, is our experience.
I've in bits that I've kind of read and written up about ponds, the main advice is to just see what arrives in. You'll have herons will arrive in. They'll have little bits of tangled pondweed, perhaps an invasive pondweed, but hopefully a native species will come in and find their own way in. I visited a place called Wild Acres Nature Reserve there on Monday, and they also are addicted to making ponds. And there was one story of them leaving a bucket aside and coming back and finding frogs and newts in it a year later. Quite incredible how wildlife finds its own way in once we kind of stop doing harm, stop actively perpetrating harm, like with slug pellets or weed killers, or and just leave things be. That kind of more experimental approach.
The one other thing I might just mention before there's questions maybe is that with this,
and we've another 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, we kind of had a chat. We've got this. We set up this thing years ago called Farming for Nature, and it's a kind of network of farmers across Ireland who kind of do amazing things for nature. They love nature, and they also are commercial farmers. So we just felt that they had an awful lot of knowledge, so we kind of harvested their knowledge in the form of a book. But there's a few tips in the book about gardens, and I just was kind of going through them here.
Hold the book up there. The books will be available, my books, 2 books, and Brendan's book over in the bookshop there, and we'll do a little bit of signing after this. But this Farming for Nature handbook is really fabulous in terms of having lots of very practical tips on ponds, on gardens, on meadows, and all the different habitat types that you might have in your garden or on your farmland.
But it was just interesting, and I just was doing a little bit of homework before today and reminding myself of some of them. This is tips from maybe 100 odd farmers. They're not odd at all, they're great. 100 farmers from across Ireland. And for gardeners, the whole thing was about avoiding chemicals, especially, and even when buying plants, because one piece of research we looked at, 22 out of 29 plants, this is in the UK survey, contain some insecticide. So even plants, a lot of plants in the garden centre, you're bringing in insecticide and all sorts of stuff. But by not having that, by using natural controls, like there's a stat as well that one ladybird can devour up to 5,000 aphids. So if you can get the balance back in your garden, and now it takes a while to get the balance back. I know that myself because some plants are being decimated all the time by bugs and stuff like that. But also watch out for your pets when there's water, because a lot of them would have doses. But the second tip, the top tip, would be around creating a little bit of a messy area or a natural area, using native plants that have a long flowering season and tolerate some level of weeds in your garden. I think that's a really obvious one. The third top tip was rethink your lawn. Now, it won't transform overnight, but if you give it time, your lawn can become something pretty amazing. And of course, you still need some functional space, perhaps for your kids, but actually rethink your lawn and look for that lovely diverse structure. The other really strong one, I think, and I love this, is collect some local seed. So if in your area you can collect, like acorns are so plentiful last year. If you have an oak tree in the area, you collect it, you put it in some soil, you cover it so that the field mice don't get it. And next year you have a little oak sapling, and this is from the local area. It's resilient. It's as close as local as you can get. So even think about having your own little nursery. There's a joy to doing that, collecting some seeds and growing your own. And finally, the whole notion of kind of no dig in your garden, if you can manage it. There's very simple systems of using really good compost and things like that to eliminate the need to dig, because one point I think is really important is that what we see is above ground, but there's so much more action going on underground. And how you manage your garden and how looking at soil compaction and what you plant, that's hugely important. And we talked about climate change before and the need to adapt to climate change. If you've got a piece of ground with lots of different plants, with lots of different rooting systems, some shallow, some deep, that's a huge sponge for holding water. Whereas if you've got a monoculture with very short rooting plants, like a lot of farmers unfortunately have now, that just can't hold water. So the water will run off, causing floods, or else in summertime you're subject to drought. So think about underground and think about what is happening above ground has a huge impact on what's happening underneath. So they're just some of the tips from the farmers. And
I love the idea of gathering up your own tree seeds. So acorns or rowan berries or holly berries are actually, I think, really tricky. But having that and doing that each year, because it's such, again, we started this with talking about gestures and a clenched fist versus a handshake towards the wild, and helping tree saplings and planting them up. And it's the most gorgeous gift as well if you can give somebody a tree sapling that's maybe 2 or 3 years old and they can plant that up. And again, the context of that is really crucial, because in Ireland we have the lowest woodland cover in Europe. We have about 10% of Ireland is under tree cover, and only about 1.2% of that is native deciduous woodlands. So it's absolutely minuscule for a country that naturally would be covered in about 80% of tree cover. So having those tree saplings is just such a huge gesture in terms of helping us to feel that we're doing something positive, in terms of being actually impactful and positive, and sharing that with friends or relatives. And some of the trees, I know you've got lists in that Farming for Nature book as well, but rowan and the proper native crab apple, so these would be different to the crab apples, the cultivars that you might buy somewhere. Hazelnuts and hazel trees, and I know you've got a balance of hazel. Hazel is a very significant tree in the Burren, which Brendan spends a lot of time trying to get rid of for some areas.
Well, what we did in the Burren, it's quite invasive in the Burren, so we genuinely love hazel, I have to say, but we love our grasslands too, and the two aren't always compatible. That's the challenge we have in the Burren, because when farming is removed from the Burren, it wants to go back to become a woodland again, which is fantastic. You've got this lovely Celtic rainforest, but then you lose these amazing grasslands. I remember when I was doing my research years ago, I did some work in the Burren. I was getting about 50 different plants in every square metre. Like, it's just mind-boggling, different species. And that's such a priceless resource. That's one of our great national jewels, I think. Trying to hang on to that sometimes can be difficult.
Hazel is one of those trees. It's kind of my favorite tree, and I still learn something new about hazel every single year. It's amazing, like a new lichen, the script lichen on the bark of the hazel, or looking at the hazel flowers, the tiny, tiny little red flowers on hazel. And there's just so many things to learn and to see just by, as you mentioned earlier, observing. Having space for wildlife in your garden and observing what grows there, what comes in there.
Can I talk about this then as well? Observation, we're all so busy running around the place now. It's just we can't. I find it hard myself to stop and sit still and observe. But actually, when you do, you see so much. You notice so much more, and you don't have to know everything, but you just have to be observant. I love this picture because I took this picture about 20 years ago. The girl on the left, or the girl on the right, actually, Aoife, she was only married last week, or last year, sorry, she was married, so it's a long time back. But one amazing thing we found in the burn is that a lot of the local people never had access to information about their place. So for a lot of the farmers, gentians were weeds because they were so common, so who cares? But gentians, like, my God, people travel from all over the world to see the burn gentians in flower. So we set up, my late wife Anne and I set up a little charity called Burn Bio, and we'd go into the local schools and tell the kids about the different elements of the burn. So the first week it'd be the geology, and then the archaeology, and the history, and then the flora, and then the fauna, and they would soak it up like sponges. So one day I was in Carron National School, a tiny little school in the heart of the burn, and I was telling them all about the magical flora of the burn, and they were just so excited. They're found only in the burn, wow, and we've seen that flower, and that's amazing. And they were so enthusiastic. I said, great stuff, guys, this is amazing. I'll be back next week to talk about the fauna of the burn, the animals of the burn. So in I come next week with a spring in my step, and these two little girls come running out to me, and they said, we have to show you this, we have to show you this. And I said, what? And they said, well, look. And they pointed all these feathers to me, and I was going, oh my God, they've murdered a crow or something like that. How am I going to explain this? And I said, what happened here? And they said, you remember last week you told us about the dactylorite, the common spotted orchid, and it's this lovely dappled leaf. And they said, well, we found some when we were playing in a garden, and that looks like a lawn with a load of daisies on it. But the girls had found the leaf of the common spotted orchid, this lovely little dappled leaf, and marked it off with the crow's feathers. And then they found another, and they got the boys involved, and they all found the whole place is covered, and it's gone, girls, amazing. That's your awareness. You're so observant and determined. And thank you so much. But really, one would have done. Why did you have to, shut a whole lot? It said, because the guy with the lawnmower comes on a Wednesday, and we don't want him chopping down our beautiful orchids. And I think giving ourselves the opportunity to observe gives us the opportunity to appreciate. And when we appreciate something, we look after it and we make space for it. So that was really, to me, a seminal moment about giving kids awareness and the knowledge, but then giving them the opportunity to act. And we've sort of carried that on. We have this national program now in Burn Bio called Heritage Keepers. And this is where we teach kids all about their place, and what's special about it. And then we give them a small amount of funding to do something great for their place, because the relationship we have, especially in Ireland, with our place is so powerful. Something really magical in that. And when we strengthen that connection, I think we unleash something powerful. So these kids, they're from a little school in Clare. They're digging a pond in their school. You can see the heavy security fencing around the school, but they're digging their own little pond, which will be a place for them to.
And Heritage Keepers is open, like there's counties, there's clusters of counties each year, aren't there, that you channel a little bit of advice and funding and support towards community groups or schools.
But if you're in Laois, by the way, and if you're a farmer, you can apply for another project. We have tons of projects. We have loads of fun in Burn Bio, but I just wanted to, maybe for a Laois farmer, we set up a little project called Refarm just a couple of weeks ago. Sorry, just put that slide in there. Biodiversity above and below ground. If you have nothing above ground, you're going to have very little below ground as well. But with Refarm, we use public, private and philanthropic funding. It would give the farmers to do something great for nature. So you mentioned swift boxes before. And swifts are one of our red listed species, I think. But by putting some of these swift boxes up with a caller, you can bring swifts back. And they're a joyful bird. They spend Tell us about swifts.
So swifts are the fastest flying bird in the world. Only peregrine falcon goes faster, but that's only in a downward dive.
No?
And swifts have been declining horrendously in the last 50 years. But when they nest, so the first time a baby swift fledges out of these, wherever it's nesting, it takes off. It needs a good big drop because this is its first time ever leaving the nest. It has those couple of seconds to learn to fly. Off it goes, and it won't land for 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
Literally, it stays on the wing. They travel all the way to Africa. They sleep on the wing. The only time then that they will actually be stationary again is when they themselves are ready to mate and nest. So such an incredible bird, and yet because they've adapted to nest in cavities around homes and old barns and tumbly down buildings, and we don't have so many of those anymore. And then there's also they're insectivorous birds, so they feed exclusively on invertebrates, flying invertebrates. And because we have such a decline in native plant species, in abundance and diversity, we have this massive decline in insects as well. So swifts and other insectivorous birds like house martins and swallows are also declining. So this is why you can do things for swifts. You can maybe have swift nest boxes, either in your church or your school or your home or wherever. But also don't just put up a lot of people tend to put up a nest box and think I've done a great thing. Somebody told me last week about 25 different nest boxes they've put on their small holding, and I was like, are any of them occupied? And I don't know. So make sure that they're positioned right, and then provide the food for them. So having your long meadow and your native hedgerows and your trees, that's going to support all those sap-sucking insects, which are the basis of the food chain, which is where we're going to support all our midges and our hoverflies and all the, hundreds of different wild flies. We tend to think of flies as blue bottles, but flies are actually a really important part of our biodiversity. So swifts really do need our help.
If any bird deserved a break, 2.5 years in the air. I mean, we've got to help it. It's just they're amazing.
And it's one of my favorite things in the summer is just sitting out and listening and watching the swifts. They have this high-pitched, squeaky noise, and they're not just in a rural environment. You get them in a lot of towns as well. They're in Dublin city centre. They're in most Irish towns, and in the afternoon, as it turns to dusk, listening to swifts is just way better than any television programme.
And there's a great group called Swift Conservation Ireland, Linda Huxley. I know they had a wonderful event in Kilrudry last year, which is really fantastic.
There's loads of good information. Birdwatch Ireland website and Swift Conservation Ireland have really good information about swift conservation. So it's one of those things that's quite tangible and easy for us to do something about.
Here's another one then. So another farmer came up with this idea. This is a much kind of bigger thing. This is a sand martin nesting bank beside a pond. Do you want to talk a bit about the sand martin? Because I know very little about it, but this farmer loves sand martins, and he built this huge cement structure to accommodate them.
Yes, sand martins, again, like house martins, they're another migratory species. They come here to nest each spring. They're specifically insectivorous. And because we, again, have tamed so much of our landscapes, they're really struggling to find nesting sites. So some people are now, I also saw a sand martin nesting habitat that somebody had made in Wild Acres on Monday. And they're really working. And the joy that people are getting out of making these buildings or these specific walls, or putting gaps, in the barn door, making sure there's a gap for the swallows to come and go. Finding and observing what you have and making sure that you're making space for wild species to come and go is really massive. I mean, I don't have sand martins up where I am, and I don't think it would be relevant, but I have swifts and swallows and house martins. And
yeah. But it's an idea. It shows what can be done. And just the last one I had here was from a lovely farmer in Clare, Fergal Smith. I think you might know him. But this notion of a pond complex. So when you're building a pond, the more structural diversity you can have, the more variety you can have, the better. So deep areas, shallow areas, corrugated type sides, all that kind of thing. it's not rocket science, but it does make a huge difference having that variety. And as we said before, they will draw in all sorts of wonderful bits of wildlife over time.
And there's so much good advice available, whether online or in books, or if people want to be very specific and practical or more philosophical. There are just so many approaches to gardening, inviting wildlife into your garden that you can take, and it's such a joyous thing.
Yeah. And the last thing I'd just like to say on the ponds, there's a lovely dairy farmer here in Laois, David Kerr, who I met. He's a big, very intensive dairy farmer, and sadly for David, he's told this story publicly, so it's no harm to share it. His father died during COVID, so they couldn't obviously have a proper burial. So instead, David asked, his father loved nature as well, so David asked all his neighbours to bring their machines, and they're going to create a pond in his father's memory. So all the neighbours brought in, and they created a pond about an acre in size, a huge thing. And he said his whole life has been changed as a result, because now at the end of the day, you can sit there and just be still, take a break, get some perspective on what you're doing and why you're doing it, and get some appreciation of the wonder of the land and nature that's on the land. And he says now his neighbours come over, they don't look into the cows anymore, they want to sit by the ponds and watch the ducks come in. And I keep getting pictures, WhatsApp messages from farmers with little ducklings arriving at the pond every year and taking off and all that. It's magical. So water is great.
Thanks. Do people have questions or observations or anything, experiences they'd like to share?
Thank you for a most inspirational talk. Absolutely brilliant, giving us all ideas. And I just want to ask you, Brendan, the date of the Stradbally Farming for Nature event.
Oh, yes. So thanks for the prompt. Here in Stradbally, now which way do I go? I think I go down, but I know, just very briefly on the whole farming thing, I think farming in some cases deservedly gets bad press. A lot of damage has been done by the wrong type of farming. But by antagonizing people and pointing fingers, you don't get too far. Instead, what we try to do is celebrate good practice. So we've got these great practitioners across the country. And we've been harvesting their knowledge in the form of a book. And this festival, it's blocked.
Farming for Nature Festival.
June 22nd to 23rd is the answer to your question. And the lovely thing about it is that the top table is all farmers. So we've got about 50 different farmers presenting their practical experiences and solutions and ideas. And the rest of us are learning. It's June. It's around solstice, just after solstice. So the first evening is about farming and food and nature. And the second day is really about the practical elements of managing different challenging soils and growing different things. And it's brilliant. These are my favorite people.
This will be the first year of it, won't it?
Yeah.
Exciting.
Farm for Nature Festival.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you. And a question here.
It's more of a contribution.
Yep.
So I'm actually an organic dairy beef and tillage farmer here in
Brilliant.
Doral, County Laois rather than Offaly. But I'm organic 16 years, and I've seen the huge changes that have happened on the farm. Like I've yellow hammerheads now. I think they're called hammerheads, maybe.
Yeah, yellow hammers. Yeah.
I have herons as well that come down. But like in relation to the lady there with the pond, when I took over the farm, there was a pond on it and it was farmed conventionally for years and years, and it took 5 years for that pond to come back to life.
Wow.
Now you're talking about a small pond, but a pond nonetheless, and the herons come down there now all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful thing to see the farm change over time with a lot of work, but very little work.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
And a lot of satisfaction back then.
Yeah. But I'm not on the Farming for Nature Festival, but I'd love to.
You might be it. Keep working on it. That sounds like a promising start. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. There's one question here.
Alan.
Yep. Alan.
Oh. Wonderful talk. Thank you for that. You mentioned mindset change, and I just wondered if you had any comments about the role of garden centres in incentivising good practice and not spraying itself. So what can be done with garden centres to encourage better practice?
That's really tricky. I mean, I don't really spend a lot of time in garden centres. I'm not quite in the gardening realm, but I do get horrified whenever I go in at the aisles full of chemical sprays. And even the plants. Like I would often encourage people to maybe plant honeysuckle or plant ivy, and they go in and they buy some non-native horticultural variety of honeysuckle or ivy, it's quite hard to get native plant species in garden centres. How we incentivise that to change within the context of the current system, I really don't know. I mean, regulation, positive incentive, and there also tends to be, you go in now because there's been such a surge in the last 5 years of people with an appetite and an enthusiasm for inviting more wildlife into their gardens. So now you go in and there's a whole stand full of wildflower seed mixes, which can be all sorts of seeds from God knows where. So they're really not ideal either. If you go to pollinators.ie or any of the kind of conservation advice, it's about allowing the wildflowers that are already in the seed bank to come up, as opposed to importing seed from somewhere. That's probably not going to be native. So how to actually get garden centres to shift in the sale of damaging things, and I'm really not sure.
It's very difficult. I mean, I often go to Seed Savers, Irish Seed Savers Association in Clare, who are just, I mean, they do things by the book at their own cost. Like, there's very few people adhere to that kind of standard. So it's supporting those that do have the high standards. And, you know, but you're right, Alan, it's a huge issue. I mean, it's crazy when we talk so much about invasive species and protecting our wild flora that we're allowing this sort of, in some cases, unregulated sale of product, which is just disastrous. But Alan, when I look at Alan, I'm always reminded to mention hedgerows. Alan's a great champion of our national hedgerows, and like, what a habit. Round of applause, Alan. But it's a great example of such a simple thing has such a profound contribution to nature in our country. It's functional, and I love nature that's functional as well. It's functional. It gives us so much in terms of nature and connectivity and habitat and nesting, food, shelter, all those different things. It's absolutely brilliant. And to me, the biggest shame in recent years has been the loss of our hedgerows. Again, death by 1,000 cuts. But there's no reason why all of us can't contribute back to the restoration by continue to raise awareness and doing our bit, planting them where we can.
And for hedgerows as well, it's not just about the quantity or like grubbing out a hedge. You can lose a hedge by allowing them to become a kind of a line of trees, which in some cases is great, but there is some kind of management is often needed for hedgerows to maintain that base. So it's in the bottom 1.5 meters where a lot of the songbirds will nest, and they need that density at the base of a hedge. So yeah, there's hedgerow management and hedgerow rejuvenation is important as well.
Your hedgerow, I mean, give it a little bit, don't do it every year, but cyclically, and then raise the blade maybe every now and again, so you're not hammering it all the time. So there's simple methods of even managing a hedge fairly well. Yeah. And the base, let it spread if you can at all. It's a great benefit too.
Yeah. I think we should wrap up because we're just over time.
Wow, how did that happen?